Hello, everyone. Forgive my appearance if you're watching this on YouTube. All I have to say is long day. This episode that you're about to watch features an interview with Diane Macedo of ABC News, who was nice enough to make the time for me. It was really great to have her. She was always one of my favorite anchors growing up. I used to watch her all the time on Imus in the morning, also on WCBS in New York City when she was the anchor of the weekend newscast and also a field reporter for the weekday morning newscast. And she was just great to talk to. Still watch her on ABC, and she's just a lovely, lovely individual whose new book, The Sleep Fix, is out by now. I'm sure you've heard about it. At the time that we recorded this interview in September, it was not out. I had a copy that was given to me in advance just so I could prep for my interview with her. And we talked a little bit about it. So a lot of changes since then. She was pregnant at the time with her second child. She's since given birth to a beautiful baby girl. So much congratulations to her on that. And of course, since then, The Sleep Fix has been released for all to consume and enjoy. So without further ado, here's my interview from back in September when it was still really, really hot outside. Boy, what I wouldn't give for the summer again, with ABC News correspondent and new author and mama for the second time, Dianne Macedo. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mike Day New Haven podcast. I don't know what number episode this is going to be because it won't be coming out until December. We're recording this in September. So if you haven't checked out the previous episodes that I've recorded before then, I hope you enjoy them. And at the time that we're recording this, I will be gearing up for episode 100. That'll be taking place tomorrow with John Miller, NYPD Deputy Commissioner of Public Relations and Counterterrorism and Intelligence, and the only American to ever interview Osama bin Laden. And if you haven't checked out the previous episodes, at the time that this is being recorded, it was episode 99, two-part special Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD Bomb Squad with retired NYPD Bomb Squad Detective and Counterterrorism Specialist Kevin Barry. So this episode's cool because we get back to the news aspect of the podcast with really one of my favorite anchors. She's been a correspondent for ABC News since 2016, a native of Mineola, Long Island, She spent over 15 years working in television, either behind or in front of the camera. Graduate of Boston College, she's enjoyed successful stints at places like Fox, CBS, and currently, as I mentioned, ABC. An author as well. Her first book, which I have here, is The Sleep Fix, practical, proven, and surprising solutions for insomnia, snoring, shift work, and more. Anchor, reporter, wife, and most of all, mama, Dianne Macedo, joins me now on the Mike Day podcast. Dianne, welcome. How are you?
Good to be with you. But how am I supposed to follow that? You're talking about people disabling bombs. I wrote a book about sleep.
Well, I mix it up. I have an eclectic mix on the show. So yeah, that's a mini series.
I feel anticlimactic by comparison.
No, it's fine. We mix it up on the show. So it's great. That's the beauty of the show. We could be talking to a retired bomb squad detective one week and then someone like yourself the next. So
okay. Well, apologies to the listeners that I haven't diffused any bombs in my life.
No, don't worry about it. So as I mentioned when I was introducing you, you're a Mineola native. God, I can't speak English today. The heat's getting to me. So it's a town that's home to just under 19,000. It's produced people like Chris Weidman, former UFC champion, former MLB player John Valentin, who's had a long stint with the Red Sox and the Mets, of course, at the end of his career. Lenny Bruce, of course, a legendary comedian, Kevin James, Jackie the Joke Man Martling of Howard Stern fame, and your friend and fellow newsie Lauren Scala of Channel 4 NBC New York. So how would you describe growing up in Mineola?
I think the big thing I got from growing up in Mineola was a real sense of community that has stuck with me my whole life. My parents are both Portuguese immigrants from the same tiny little farm town in Portugal. There's a very strong Portuguese presence in Mineola. So it's one of those towns where if you drive down the street, you see the Portuguese bakery and the Portuguese deli and the Portuguese club. Well, by the way, there are 3 of them in the town. So growing up in the Portuguese community, there was a very sort of tight-knit feel. Almost everyone's related to everybody and everyone helps each other out and everybody knows everybody. And then as I got older and kind of, made my own friends and branched outside of the Portuguese community as well, I had that same feel just on a different level, going to Mineola High School. Lauren Scala was actually a friend of mine in my own grade. And so it just always felt like a community that was big enough for you to be able to find your way and kind of find your niche, but small enough that you had that kind of sense of support when you needed it. And that's something that still today, as my husband and I talk about what our future looks like and where we want to be and what we want to do, community is always one of the top things on my list.
Absolutely. I think it's the same here in New Haven. I'm Hispanic, and the languages Portuguese and Spanish are not too dissimilar. I'm Dominican, so I find that to be quite interesting. And we kind of have the same thing here. It's a pretty large Hispanic community. And you said you have that same sense of camaraderie. So it's nice to hear that from your angle. So, for me, I started getting interesting. God, I am atrocious today. I started getting interested in media, as a kid. I'm a big sports fan. So for me, it was Mike and the Mad Dog on WFAN, or I was watching television, of course, on the news aspect, and watching Charlie Gibson anchor the evening news on ABC. So for you, when would you say the interest in media first sparked?
I think it was really at the dinner table for me. We had one of those families where dinner time was sacred. It's very rare that we were allowed to eat over a friend's house or do anything at that time. But while we were around the dinner table, even from a really young age, our parents talked about real things. They asked us about our day, how was school, how was, so on. And we got to talk about whatever we wanted to talk about. But there always was some kind of discussion too about something that was going on in the world that day. And I think it instilled in all of us, but particularly me, this just inherent interest in current events and wanting to be a bit skeptical and to ask questions about things and to just sort of be interested in what was going on in the world around us, not just what was going on in my personal world. And I think that planted a seed that didn't necessarily make me think that I wanted to work in news from childhood, but I think planted an interest that led to where I am now.
Diane Macedo is our guest here in the Mike Newman podcast. She is, of course, a correspondent and anchor with ABC News, and we're happy to have her. So you left home for Boston College in the fall of 2000. At this point, it's your first time, I think, being away from home. And what's interesting is you double majored in both communications and political science. Now, I find it interesting because in regards to working in communications, or majoring in it, I should say, Fordham's right in the backyard, not too far from the Bronx, has a great communications program, has produced many a great broadcaster, including some of your former colleagues, Dick Brennan and Alice Gaynor at Channel 2. And so I'm curious, why Boston as opposed to Fordham in order to pursue communications?
I mean, I think Alice, Dick, and I would have gotten into a lot of trouble had we actually been in college together. But I think there's different parts to this answer. The kind of the cheesy but honest answer is I got kind of a gut feeling when I went to visit BC that I can't explain, but it just felt like I belonged there. They also gave me the biggest financial aid package of, I think, almost all the schools, if not all the schools I applied to, and there were many. So that's the more practical side of things. But as far as Fordham is concerned, I didn't even apply there because I don't think I applied anywhere within a 3-hour radius of home. And I don't know if this was related to growing up in a strict household or just my personality. I was kind of one of those kids that was always asking if I could sleep over or eat over, or, I kind of was always out of the house. And I think when it came to college, I was really ready to be independent, or at least independent-ish, where I wanted to be far enough from home where I wasn't going to live at home and I wasn't going to be home all the time, but close enough where I could still come for holidays and special events and, to do my laundry, that kind of thing. Independent-ish.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I'm going to start using that with my mom. So it was while at BC that you took up specifically singing in an acapella group. I imagine you'd been singing prior to that. And you're a great singer. I mean, you have a really, really good voice. You had a band for a while. You're quite welcome. So what sparked the interest in that? And I guess who were some of your favorite singers growing up and still to this day?
My mother will tell you that I was singing pretty much straight out of the womb. One of my earliest memories is we had these hideous rugs. I still don't know who has a rug in the kitchen, but we did growing up, one in front of the sink and another in front of the stove. And I used to lay on one of those two rugs while my mother was making dinner at night and just wave my arms and legs in the air while I sang to myself. My mother will describe this in detail. And I actually remember it. I must have been maybe 3 years old. So that's how early kind of singing started as just a hobby. And then going to school, I always loved to perform too. So I was always in the school musical. I sang in the chorus. I sang in the choir. I actually, when I was, I want to say maybe 12 years old, I sang in a Portuguese wedding band. That they actually came to recruit my sister to sing for the band, but I was the one who ended up doing the job. So that's kind of always been something on the side that I really loved to do. And then in high school, it continued. I sang in the chorus. I sang in a group called the Vocal Jazz, which was kind of similar to an a cappella group in many ways in school. And then when I got to college, in high school, I was one of those people, I did everything. was like every activity almost you could imagine. I was a part of all of the clubs and all of the sports and all of the everything. And when you get to college, you really have to pick. And it was either going to be lacrosse or I was going to sing. And I ended up singing and I absolutely loved it. And I kind of learned, you know, in terms of who taught me how to sing, I kind of learned a little bit all along the way. I never had voice lessons or was formally trained or anything like that. But I think I had a lot of influences in my life along the way. And I kind of just learned by trying to copy them and practicing.
I got to make a quick aside here. You know, you're a Yankee fan. We'll touch on that in the concluding segment. So you were going to Boston College when the rivalry was especially hot. And 2003, of course, is that infamous ALCS where Aaron Boone hits the home run to send the Yankees to the World Series. So being a Yankee fan up there, specifically during that time, tell me what that was like.
Difficult and awesome at the same time, because it was right before we started losing.
Yeah.
So it was difficult because I had never experienced a rivalry like that where I could say nothing to anybody. But just wearing a Yankee hat to a bar one day had a guy try to spill a beer on my head. And people were very aggressive about their hatred for the Yankees. And I remember going to some wrestling event. It had nothing to do with baseball. It wasn't even a traditional sport. And there were like 7 Yankee sucks chants that erupted at this event. No matter where you went. I mean, you could go to tea with the Queen in Boston and someone would start chanting Yankee sucks. So the rivalry was at a level that I didn't really understand until I got there. But it was also fun because we were winning all the time. So, you know, in a way, people in Boston, they could get as angry as they wanted, but at the end of the day, we were the ones celebrating. And I think for my actual friends who were there was a fun spirit to it all, where we kind of enjoyed the ability to talk a little trash to each other during those times and so on. And then come together at the end of the day, and you drink to celebrate, I drink my sorrows away, you know, everyone shares a beer, and that's the end of it. But it was a really fun time, and I have a lot of fond memories, particularly from that game that you mentioned, because God, was that awesome.
Yeah, I'm a Yankee fan too, so shout out to them. Garrett Cole pitched a gem last night, and they're probably going to play the Sox in the wild card game, so I'm going to stock up on ibuprofen and Pepto-Bismol to get ready. So moving ahead, Dianne Macedo is our guest here in the Mike Graham podcast. Her book, Sleep Fix, comes out in December. By the time you hear this, it'll be out. Practical, proven, and surprising solutions for insomnia, snoring, shift work, and more. So graduating college, I mean, now you're kind of, I don't want to say thrown into the trenches, but now you really have to figure it out. You have your degree, and it's not easy for someone to get a job out of college. I finally landed my first one, and I've been out of college for about 1.5 years. The pandemic really didn't make anything easier either. So for you, what was your game plan upon graduation to get a gig in television and obviously start what's turned out to be a great career path for you?
It wasn't my game plan. My game plan wasn't to go into TV. I really wanted to write.
Right.
At the time, I had worked for a small news station in Newton, Massachusetts while I was at school. And that was kind of you did a little bit of everything there. I also did a PR internship just to see what that world was about. But when I came out, the one common denominator was I really wanted to write. And I had an interest in government issues, not so much the players, because I didn't care about the gossipy part of politics, and I still really don't. Politicians don't interest me, but policy does. And so those were kind of the two common denominators. So initially, I had planned to move to Washington, D.C. and work for a think tank down there or something along those lines. Applications were in, I had a few job offers, and I had in the meantime applied to every news organization in the tri-state area, including the local paper, and literally nobody got back to me. But I had always heard how impossible it is to get into media in New York anyway, so that didn't really surprise me. But we had a death in the family. My cousin, who is only 6 months older than I am, died in a car crash. And it was, thank you. It was devastating, as you can imagine. He was like a sibling to me, because particularly that side of the family is very close. And so I just kind of decided I couldn't leave my family at that time. I just needed to stick around, whatever consequences there were to that. So turned down the job offers, changed the game plan to New York. actually gave his eulogy, and his sister's boss was there at the funeral and asked her about me after hearing me speak at the funeral. And she said, she's my cousin, she's a writer, she just graduated, or she wants to be a writer, she just graduated. And he was the CFO of a PR firm. And so he asked if I was interested in working in PR. And so that was my first job out of college, was as a PR assistant at a PR firm in the city. It kind of fell in my lap in that way. And it was while I was at that firm, I kind of made clear that, and it became more clear to me as I was doing the job, that what I really wanted to do was news. Because here I was pitching reporters all day long, and what I really wanted to be was the person on the other side of that conversation. And so it just so happened that things worked out where the PR firm, the company that I mainly worked for, decided to take their PR team in-house, which left me open to search for work with the blessing of my boss and everybody knowing, because at that time we didn't know if our team was going to be dissolved or not, and if we were going to have jobs or not. I ended up getting promoted at the PR firm during that time. But in that 2-week period before I knew if I was being fired or not, I was job hunting, and I was reunited with a friend of mine from high school who was working at Fox News. And so she told me about this position in radio that she thought I would be great for, submitted my resume for me. I went into the interview, I took a pay cut for the job, I got the job, and that was how I got my foot in the door. That was my first job at Fox News as a radio booker.
So working at Fox initially off the camera, then in front of it, you got to be a contributor on shows like Huckabee, Red Eye, and then of course Imus, which is where I first found out about you, because I love listening to him. I miss him. And so that being said, what would you say were the most valuable lessons you learned about media, both off camera and on, that you feel still help you to this day?
Even then, I had my eye on, I wanted to make sure I was doing my job well, but I also was working toward the next. And so when I was working as a booker for radio, where I was courting interviews for our affiliate radio stations, I would do that during my normal, allotted time. But then in my free time, I would do the job I wanted to do, which is write, as I said. So I would shadow our producer who was producing the 1-minute newscasts. And I was very friendly with her. And so I asked her to show me, how do you do the job? And so she did. And so I would sit there and pretend I was doing her job for the rest of the night. I got off at 8 p.m. I would stay until midnight every night and just write these 1-minute newscasts as if I was the producer. And luckily I had a good boss at the time who allowed me to leave my scripts for him, and he would critique my writing and send them back to me. And I continued to do that for a period of time until he said, I know you want to write, but I really think you need to consider broadcast. You have a great voice for it. You've already had some experience in it, and I think you'd be great at it. So he was the one who kind of steered me in that direction and started telling me, instead of sending me your scripts, I want you to go into the booth and I want you to record them. And I want you to send me the sound. And so that's what I started doing. And so he went from critiquing my writing to critiquing my delivery. And he was the first person who put me on air doing an American Idol podcast for Fox News Radio. Before I even really knew what podcasts were, I had one. Again, I didn't really know what I was doing at all. But that's kind of where my real start in broadcast began, I guess, was in radio, doing these kind of side projects. And all of them, even the Idol stuff that I was doing, I was also doing an Idol newscast, like a recap at the end of the day, because I loved singing. I loved American Idol. I made the whole team do an American Idol poll and so on. So
everyone hated Simon Cowell.
Pretty much, or loved him, a little of both. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got my start. And for the longest time, years and years and years, that continued throughout my career, where I would kind of do my job by day or by night or whatever weird hours I had, and then use a lot of my free time to learn how to and actually do the job I wanted to do until I got that job.
Diane Macedo here on the Mike Diane podcast. I'll move ahead because I don't want to keep her too long. I mean, she's very generous to give us some time because she's a very busy woman. So you got the chance to then go to WCBS for a while and anchor the weekend newscast there. You were also a weekday reporter on the morning broadcast with Chris Raggi and Mary Calaby. And of course, then there was your time at WNN, World News Now for ABC, also anchoring their early morning newscast before GMA would come on. So during that time there, you had you worked with a lot of people, great people, I'm sure, but it's two specific co-anchors you worked with that you just had such a great chemistry with. And you mentioned in your book is Andrea Grimes and Candace Gibson. So if you had to say in working with them, what is it about each person that brought out the best in you, not only as an anchor, but as a person?
It's funny because they're such different people, and yet I love them both so much, so dearly. Both Andrea and Candace were people that I got along with right off the bat. Andrea could not have been more welcoming to me. And in our industry, it has a very bad rap for being very petty. People are very cutthroat, etc. I really didn't know what situation I was coming into at CBS. And so walking in that first day and meeting Andrea Grimes and the meteorologist, Vanessa Murdoch, I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know if this was going to be a mean girl scenario or what. And it was quite the opposite. They could not have been nicer to me. Andrea and I have kind of parallel lives, which we joked about all the time. She grew up in the town right across the tracks, literally from me. So we always joked that I was the townie from the wrong side of the tracks. We had a lot of other things in common throughout our lives, including the fact that the day that I told Andrea, fast forward to me not even working there anymore, I had Andrea and Vanessa over to tell them that I was pregnant. And Andrea was coming over to tell me that she was also pregnant. And we ended up having our first children a month apart from each other. So we have led a lot of parallel lives. We had a lot in common. But we have very different senses of humor in a way that I think really complemented each other on the air. Andrea's, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's the one that comes to mind, so I'll use it. She's a little more kind of innocent, I guess, with her humor. She's very clean. Very clean. Like what you see on TV is exactly what you get with Andrea. She's one of those people who never swears. You will never hear a curse word come out of her mouth. And she's just one of the kindest people ever. I'm a little more inappropriate, a little more rough around the edges, but we loved that about each other. And I think we worked well because we teed each other up to be able to show those respective sides as best as possible. And I think the viewers really responded to that. When it came to Candace, it's kind of the opposite. Candace is the more inappropriate, more rough around the edges version of me when it comes to his sense of humor. But I found him hilarious. And we just so enjoyed working on World News Now together because I think it really allowed us to let that side of us out. It's not something that comes out in a regular newscast or a regular news program. And I think because we understand each other's humor so well, I often say that co-anchoring with Candace in the context of that show was like dancing. If you've ever done any kind of ballroom dancing with a partner, you don't really know. It's hard to explain how you know they want you to turn, for example. But you just know there's a certain shifting of the weight or a movement of the arm that you know that's when you're supposed to turn or dip or whatever it is. And that's how it felt with Candace a lot of times, especially once we had a little bit more experience with each other. He would say certain things that I knew were meant to tee me up to make a joke that he knew would land, and vice versa. I would say things to tee him up. And so I think it was a combination with Candace specifically. I think it was a combination of us understanding each other, but also us being really generous with each other, where I would say things sometimes not to make myself shine, but because I knew it was going to give him an opportunity to shine. And he would do the same with me. And I think that carried over to our relationship off camera too, where he's still one of my best friends. We're literally hanging out together this weekend.
Awesome.
I don't know if that completely answered your question, but that's the best way I can describe the chemistry with those two. And they're still two of my favorite people.
Yeah, I sense that, and I had this conversation with Chris Amino a while ago when he was on, the former NBC meteorologist. I'm like, you can tell watching television in anything, sports, cast, whatever it may be, a newscast, where the chemistry is not there. It's just forced. And then you can tell when it's real. I always felt like I was never up to watch you and Candace. I would catch the clips from ABC's YouTube channel, but watching you and Andrea on the weekends when I got up, I always felt in both instances it was never forced. It was a real chemistry there. And I could tell, okay, they like each other off the air. They get along just fine off the air. And that's a great thing because obviously, whatever the emotions are, they radiate through the screen. And when it's a positive one, well, that, it lets you stick around as a viewer. And obviously, who doesn't love someone that genuinely enjoys what they do for a living? And I always got that sense watching you and Candace and watching you and Andrea. So, it's funny, it segues perfectly into talking about your book now. And around the time that you remember you joking when you announced you were pregnant with your son, that I'm finally sleeping and now in a few months I will not. And that's when you said that you were pregnant. So, and having him, and I see when you post him on Instagram, he is like the cutest. He's really funny.
Thanks.
No problem. So, how much did that play a role, of course, in deciding to write this book?
So I think I'm the only person who got more sleep after having a newborn than before, because that's how bad my sleep was before. And as you mentioned, I kind of went on this mission after working early hours at Fox to earlier hours at CBS. I was waking up at 1:30 in the morning there to doing a true overnight shift for ABC, where I was going in at 10 p.m. and coming out at, in the beginning it was 5 or 6 a.m., which was actually fine for me. But once I started doing GMA, I was coming home at 9, 10 in the morning and then trying to sleep. And I made all the mistakes and I kind of broke myself. And so I went on this mission when I finally hit rock bottom and became immune to Ambien. I just kind of went on this mission that I need to make this a priority and I need to figure out how to fix this. And I had tried all of these kind of gimmicky tips, the tips and tricks that you see all the time in listicles or even on TV segments. And I realize I work for a TV station as I say that, but the idea is often to just get the quickest, most interesting thing out there. And people want a flash in the pan answer. But what I found was all those things just made me worse, which made me more frustrated, which made it harder for me to sleep. And so I finally stopped reading all the typical popular books on sleep and articles and so on. And I started reading books written by sleep doctors and actually academic textbooks and working with a sleep medicine specialist. And in combining those things, I not only fixed my sleep problems, I started getting a full night's sleep on the overnight shift, when the only advice I could get from people was, well, if you're not sleeping on the overnight shift, you need to quit your job. And that just wasn't a realistic option for me. And so once I finally did fix the problem and I realized how practical some of these solutions were, all I could think was, why isn't anybody talking about this? And so as I started reaching out to people in the sleep medicine community, I found that they had the same frustration. They felt like they were shouting this from the rooftops, and yet it was never the message that was really getting through to the majority of the public. And so, yeah, it was one of those things where it was the kind of messaging that I wish existed when I was battling my own problems. And so since it didn't exist, I decided to write it. And along the way, we aired my story on the overnight show. It did so well as a series on the overnight show that Good Morning America then asked me to come on and do a shorter version for GMA. And what happened after that was people came out of the woodwork, viewers, personal friends, colleagues, to ask me all these questions about sleep. And so if it was something related to my own experience that I knew about, I'm getting a message here. Okay. Something popped up on the Zoom. So if it was something that I knew about and that I had experienced personally, I gave them the response that I knew was correct. If it was something that I didn't know about because it wasn't part of my own personal experience, I was fascinated. So I researched it, and I still came back and ended up giving them the answer. And so by the end, I had this huge Google Doc that I would just, depending on who was emailing me, I would kind of rearrange the order of the different categories of problems and solutions that I'd created and send them the response. So Michael Strahan, for example, was one of the people who asked me, and I know he travels a lot. So I moved all the jet lag stuff to the top because I thought that would be most useful to him, and so on and so forth. And after a while, I had enough people say, you should really just write a book on this. that I finally did. And with my son, it was interesting because I had the baby. He was awake, obviously, throughout the course of the night, but he eventually learned how to sleep through the night, like all babies do. And I was still waking up. And I thought I was still waking up because I just got used to that rhythm. And what I realized, one of the things I discovered was a big issue for me was body temperature. And I had, my husband had bought me this device that regulates the temperature of your bed. And I had realized throughout the course of using that device that the reason I was waking up throughout the night was not because of stress and not because I had to go to the bathroom, but it was actually because I was getting too hot. And we had put that device in storage. And so when we finally dug it out of storage, and after renovating for my kids' nursery, when we finally dug it out of storage and plugged it in, and I woke up the next morning having gone to sleep the night before, all I could think was what an idiot I am, because I had already learned this lesson months prior when I did this the first time. And yet after having my son, I was already doing the same thing again. I was dismissing my sleep problems as something that was just normal and to be expected. And I yet again learned that no, these things can be addressed and can be fixed. And that, you know, the temperature solution was just one small example of the many that ended up working for me and end up showing up in studies over and over again that can help people. But it often, we need the reminder that we don't have to live like this. These problems are not normal and they are fixable. And even for someone who had done as much work as I had done by that point, I still needed that reminder after having my son and losing the ability to sleep again, that again, this is not normal, it's fixable, let's fix it. And so, yeah, that I think was the impetus to the book that finally kicked me over the edge, where I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do this because there's zero time, but I'm going to figure it out and we're going to do it. And, you know, luckily I have a very supportive husband who's helped me a ton along the way. And now I'm excited. The book is done. It's coming out December 14th. And it's gotten amazing reviews from the sleep medicine community. And, you know, they just keep telling me you're going to help so many people. And I honestly believe that it will. So I'm really excited for people to get their hands on this book and start sleeping again, because it changed my life. And I think it'll change so many other people's as well.
You mentioned Michael Strahan. By the time you'll be listening to this, for all my listeners out there, his number 92 will be retired by the Giants. I'm a Giants fan. I'm just saying, Michael Strahan, if you want to come on this show, I mean, perhaps you should. I'm just putting it out there. You know, I'm not saying, listen, if you want to. But that being said, you know, it segued perfectly into my next question, because I was going to say, was writing this book personally therapeutic for you? Because sometimes, I mean, we need a ventilation system, for lack of a better way to put it, to put our frustrations out there. And I love to write too, and to channel that into writing, for me, I know has always helped me in rough moments. And listen, we need our sleep. We're seeing this now, to where I mentioned off the air, and also when I was introducing you, as you heard, I do a lot of NYPD and FDNY interviews. Those guys are working the night shift, and that's not easy. You know, people who are working construction, could be anything. Obviously now, hospitals, nurses working overnight. It's not an easy shift. And we see, sadly, that there are cases where if you don't get a good overnight sleep, I mean, it takes years off your life and greatly affects for the negative the quality of your life. So to put this book together, you know, you talked about the feedback, but for you personally, were there times where you found yourself, for lack of a better way to word it, kind of emotional, looking at, as you saw it on the paper, writing it down, the problems you've been facing, and obviously the steps that you had taken to overcome those problems?
Absolutely. In several different aspects, but one that sticks out to me was when I recalled a memory that I wrote in the book. And at this time, my insomnia was at its peak. I was sleeping terribly. And I was sometimes on days that I worked like crazy, I had very, very little time in bed. But then on other days, I would lay in bed and I couldn't fall asleep. So I had, you know, kind of a twofold problem there. But even on the days that I didn't get called in, you know, I would spend 12 hours in bed just to try to get a decent amount of sleep, anything. And at that time, I would have considered 6 hours to be plenty. But I was getting more along the lines of 3 or 4 or maybe 5, and spending 12 hours in bed to do it. And then when I got out of bed, because that still wasn't enough sleep for me, I felt terrible. And so I would come into work and kind of turn it on for the cameras. And I wasn't faking it. I loved my job. As I said, I loved co-anchoring with Candice. I loved doing GMA, and I have an exciting job. So I'm lucky in that respect. And so during my work day, I kind of expended all the energy I had. And then I would get home and I would be this kind of zombie who tried to go to sleep and couldn't. And so by the time my husband came home from work, I was waking up from having not actually slept. And all I could think about was how terrible I felt and how terrible I was going to feel that whole day going into work that night, having not slept. And so I remember one day when he, he essentially just said, and he wasn't being argumentative or rude or anything. He was just sad. And he said, I'm jealous of your colleagues. I'm jealous of Candice and everybody else that you work with because they get the fun, Diane. And it kind of broke my heart to realize, not only at the time, but then in retrospect, as I was recalling that and writing it in the book, everything that he went through, watching me suffer, knowing how much he loves me and feeling helpless, not only to help me, but then also feeling like he's missing out on this person that he married, his life partner, who's a shell of herself because of this problem that she can't seem to do anything about. And it's not that I wasn't trying, I was at the time, but nothing I was doing was working. So that was one of many examples where it really hit home for me how much this problem not only affected me, but affected all of these people in my life around me, and how much it made a difference once I fixed it. Not only that I felt better, but they all were positively impacted by the fact that I finally addressed it and fixed it.
A few more questions here. We'll get to the concluding segment in a moment with Diane Macedo, of course, the author of Sleep Fix, which comes out December 14th, I believe. So as far as the process for writing a book, I mean, even for experienced authors, I had Mike Lubick on the show a little while ago. He's written so many books, but even for him, it's a little bit difficult. So for a first-time author, I can only imagine what the process was like. What are some of the more key lessons you learned as you were putting this book together?
I think to just get started. I'm a perfectionist, and a lot of times I want the full plan laid out before I go ahead. I want the full outline before I plunge into something. And I would, for example, often get stuck on how to start a chapter or how to organize a chapter or whatnot. And after a while, and I've realized this in news writing as well, if I can't think of the lead sentence, it's really hard for me to plow on. But I've learned that I kind of have to do that and just start writing. Write the crappiest lead sentence, the crappiest starting paragraph, whatever it is. Because once you get flowing, you'll often find in the process, oh, that's my lead. But you kind of have to get the ball rolling to do it. And then the other part of it was, for me, is knowing when to step away and take a break, which is also really hard for me because I am a very hardworking person and I'm just used to, by sheer force of will, I'm going to get this thing done. And writing, particularly, I think for a book, just doesn't work that way, or at least it didn't for me. There were times where I needed to step away. I had these ideas in my head and I knew they could fit together and I just couldn't quite do it. And what I found was often when I took a minute to step away, more than a minute, and I walked home from the office, or, I took my son to the park, or I did something that was completely unrelated to the task at hand and took my mind off of it completely, I would come back and suddenly all those pieces I was playing around with suddenly fit together perfectly. And so the more and more that happened, the more I realized that had to be part of my process. And I think that relates to a lot of areas in life. This is why I think a lot of people talk about meditation and other practices like that. And I think at the root, some of us just need to learn when to step away and give our brain a break, watch Real Housewives, do whatever you have to do to unplug and come back to it later. Because sometimes your brain just needs a minute to kind of process that all. And it will save you time in the future, even though it feels like it's costing you time in the moment.
I already know my older sister, who's going to listen to this episode when it comes out, is going to love that specific part because that is something she often tells me. So shout out to you, Judge. I can already hear. See? Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
I remember reading a quote. I think it was, most things will start working again if you turn them off and on.
Right.
You reset them, turn them off, and then turn them back on. And the same goes for you.
All right. So that brings us to the concluding segment. I've really had a great time chatting with you. I'm so glad you made the time for me. You're one of my favorite anchors. So it's good to actually finally meet you through this setting. and chat with you about your book and about your excellent career. So it is now time for a segment of this podcast called Rapid Fire. 5 hit and run questions.
This always makes me nervous. I feel like I'm really bad at rapid fire things, but I'll do my best.
Don't worry. Are you ready?
I am ready, I think.
First, favorite story you ever covered?
Oh, Jesus. I did this really funny one very early on in my career about warning labels and the most ridiculous warning labels on the most typical products, and delved into why they exist. And most of the time it's because somebody actually tried to do it. And so just learning the backstories, it's not a great testament to human intelligence, but it's good for a laugh, particularly if you like some dark humor.
Second, favorite interview you've ever done?
Ooh, I don't know. God, I got to think about that. Sorry, I told you I'm really bad at rapid fire.
If you can say pass, is fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass on that. Maybe I'll come back to it if I can think of someone.
Third, funniest thing you ever got in trouble for?
Oh wait, I got one.
Okay, go ahead.
Favorite interview I've ever done was Fantasia Barrino.
Okay.
She is hilarious and was literally singing with me in the interview. We had an absolute blast together. I adore her. And she was one of the earlier interviews in my career too, and just made me feel so comfortable as a journalist. So I'm gonna give that one to Fantasia.
Oh, good. Okay, so that brings us to their aforementioned third question. Funniest thing you ever got in trouble for?
I didn't really get in trouble for it, but when I was working at the Newton News in Newton, Massachusetts, the world's tiniest news station, we used to do this practice run when we anchored the show. It was a weekly newscast. So you would tape it once and it would run all week. And we used to do this practice run, and I got in one day and we started the show, and it was right around Halloween time. And so one of the stories we were covering was the prevalence, a warning from the sheriff, basically telling people, or the police chief telling people to be very aware of date rape around this time, and to be on the lookout for people trying to slip Rohypnol into your drink. And so during the practice broadcast, I said Rohypnol, otherwise known as the date rape drug. And I accidentally said wape instead of rape, just because I just misspoke, slip of the tongue. And because it was the practice news session, I laughed at myself and then continued on. Now, normally this practice session would only last, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And in this case, we just kept going. And I didn't really understand why we were doing this dress rehearsal for so long, but whatever, I went along with it. And only when we got to the very end of the newscast did somebody, I asked, like, how come we did the full run through? And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, why did we practice the full run through? And they said, no, that was the show. And so I had that whole slip up, plus me laughing at myself, it turns out was being broadcast, but I didn't know that. And so they did allow me to at least fix it in post, so that didn't play for the entire week. But not only did I have the embarrassing event of having that broadcast out to whoever was watching at the time, but when I got home that night to my dorm room, I learned that day that my roommates had been watching my newscast all of this time, because this was the one time that they couldn't stop. They couldn't bear to keep it a secret anymore. So they openly laughed at me and mocked me for obviously saying date rape on television. And it was only then that I learned that for weeks and months, they had been watching these newscasts every night that I went out to the news station, with me not knowing that anyone was paying any attention.
The unrefuting you came out.
So exactly. Surprisingly, I didn't get in trouble for it, but it was definitely embarrassing.
Fourth, you're a Yankee fan, as I mentioned before. Top 5 favorite Yankees of all time.
Top 5. Ooh, they're all going to be from the same era, because when Joe Torre left, I kind of stopped paying attention. So number 1 is Paul O'Neill.
Warrior.
Hands down. I absolutely adore Paul. I love you. Who else? El Duque.
Yep.
Love El Duque. Andy Pettit. I know
my favorite.
The steroid controversy, but I can't help it. I adore him. Alfonso Soriano.
Yep.
I have his shirt. Jeter. Respect.
Yep.
Gotta have Derek Jeter up there. Was that 5?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, there you go. They're my top 5.
Mine.
I've never played that. I've never done that before.
Oh, okay. First time for everything. My top 5: Hideki Matsui, loved them. 2009 forever. Godzilla, of course. Fourth, I'm gonna have to say, I know who my top 3 is. Jorge Posada.
Oh yeah, I love Jorge.
Third,
can I add him in as my number 6?
third, Jeter, of course. Second, Mariano. And then first would be Andy Pettitte for me. And honorable mention, A-Rod. I know he had his off the field things, but man, 2009 doesn't happen without him. So shout out to A-Rod. Fifth and finally, I'm 21. I'm getting after it. For anybody that's my age and getting into this kind of stuff, what advice would you give them, given your experiences?
Don't be afraid to carve your own path and realize that there is no one path. I think the most popular question I get from people is, what did you do to get where you are? And I used to ask the same thing to people when I would go to career fairs and so on. And I just wanted someone to give me a list, do X, Y, Z, and you will reach your goals. And as much as I wanted that, I never got it. And I now know the reason I never got it is because everybody has a different path. And I found for me, throughout my entire career, I've always been told, you'll never be able to do it. It'll never happen. And I found a way to do it. I found a way to make it happen. And so I think that would be my number one. And the honorable mention advice I would add is go into this industry because you love news, not because you want to be on TV. Because it may appear glamorous from the outside, but there's so much of the job that isn't. And if you don't absolutely love it, it will break you. The kinds of emotional things that we see, that we deal with, along with just, again, the non-glamorous things that happen behind the scenes. I think a lot of people see it as an easy path to stardom or to fame or to being on television. You don't want to go into this field if you don't absolutely love and care about news.
That concludes what's been a great episode of the Mike New Haven podcast. Again, it's being recorded in September. It'll be released in December. So before we go, quick plugs real quick. Besides the book, The Sleep Fix, of course, as I said, practical, proven, and surprising solutions for insomnia, snoring, shift work, and more, which will be out December 14th. What else do you want to plug, Diane? Any shout outs? Where can people find you on social media?
But I just realized I forgot to plug my actual newscast. So I just wanted to let everybody know, because we didn't talk about my current job too much. You can find me on ABC News Live every day, Monday through Friday, pretty much all day from 9 a.m. to 3:30 or 4 p.m. because there's so much breaking news now that we're on. But we have hourly newscasts at the top of the hour, as well as other programming. And again, you can find that at abcnewslive.com, or you can stream the ABC News Live service from just about any streaming service, Hulu, you name it, they all have it. And you'll get to see me all day long talking about the day's news. I am at Dianne R. Macedo on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. I just signed up for TikTok. I haven't posted on it yet. I don't really know how to, but I'm going to figure it out. I am the Dianne Macedo on TikTok. And yeah, again, the book is The Sleep Fix. It goes on sale December 14th, but it is available for pre-order now wherever books are sold. And anyone who does pre-order a copy right now can get we're going to promote this next week, but if you pre-order now, you get a bonus video of me now explaining a few tips already that you're going to get from the book. So a little sneak preview for anybody who wants some immediate help. We've got immediate help for you if you pre-order.
Good. Happy to hear it. On my end, if you're here for the first time because you're listening for Diane, for everyone that's listening out there, if you don't know where to find me by now, Instagram, original_MC1. Twitter, I'm at Mike in New Haven. LinkedIn, Mike Colón. And you can type in MIC''D, which is the first word of the podcast, Mike in New Haven. And you can find me and connect with me there. I'd be happy to talk with you. If you have any sports-related inquiries for the podcast, you can call me at 917-727-0891, or you can email me, Colón on Sports, COLON on Sports at gmail.com. And of course, if you have any other inquiries related to my fire service guest, NYPD guest, and of course, newsguests like Diane, you can call me up at 917-781-6189, or you can email me, the Colón Report, THECOLON report at gmail.com. At the time that this is being recorded, this is September. So whoever was on previously before Diane in December, hope you enjoyed them. And whoever's next, I hope you enjoyed them too. But coming up for September at the time that we're recording this interview, he once interviewed Osama bin Laden at his compound in 1998. He's the only American to ever do so. John Miller will join us for the milestone 100th episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And of course, 23 New York City police officers died at the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. But if it wasn't for this man, the number would have been higher. Surviving the collapse of the South Tower, he immediately hopped on the radio and warned his colleagues to get out of the North Tower before it was too late, saving numerous lives in the process. Retired New York City Police Emergency Service Detective Ken Winkler will join me on the show for what will be Volume 2 of the miniseries The E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Now, on behalf of Dianne Macedo, I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.